All right, it's time to take a look at another 2025 college football schedule. And up today, Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's had a decent run here under Brent Key. Obviously, it started to go south, towards the end of Paul Johnson, and then the Jeff Collins era was just a complete disaster. And, truth in advertising here, Georgia's my favorite team. I enjoyed the Jeff Collins era, but it was a complete disaster. And Brent Key is obviously a huge improvement for Georgia Tech over what they have had, and has this team and this program, I think, headed in the right direction. And I think they're in a pretty good spot being in the ACC. This is not a trash talking video. And I'm a Georgia fan, so sometimes whatever I say about Georgia Tech kind of gets taken that way. These aren't trash talk videos. Now, some of my opinions are going to be wrong. I mean, obviously, I make a million predictions and express a million opinions or whatever every single year about college football, and some are wrong. Some are wrong about Georgia. Some are wrong about every team. I think Georgia Tech's in a good spot being in the ACC. I don't think Georgia Tech is in a position to compete or win national championships. I don't, if they were in the SEC or the Big Ten, I don't think they would be in the upper half probably of those leagues, but that doesn't matter. Like, you're not in the SEC or the Big Ten. And that's not an insult. I'm saying that to say, when you look at the ACC and you look at the world we're in today in college football with a 12-team playoff, probably soon to expand to 14, and you look over at the ACC and you go, who's getting in the playoffs from over there? Once we go to 14 teams, 2 teams are getting in every single year from the ACC, no matter what. Last year, they got 2 in anyway with Clemson and SMU. And when you look at, sort of what has gone on within the ACC over the last 4 to 5 years, and sort of where it looks like it might be headed over the next 4 to 5 years, while there are a couple of programs in the ACC that have the ability to be sort of consistent playoff contenders, Clemson, I hesitate to say Florida State because they're in such a bad spot right now, but Florida State, and really that's it. Miami sort of has the potential, but they've always had the potential, and it just hasn't come to pass. I mean, Georgia Tech really has had more success in the ACC over the last 15 years than Miami has. Now, Miami had a really good year last year. The drawn out rambling point that I'm trying to make here about Georgia Tech is, like a lot of teams in the ACC, like a lot of teams in the Big 12, and honestly, like a lot of teams in the SEC and the Big 10, Georgia Tech is in a position to where in an up year, in a good year for Georgia Tech, where maybe they pull an upset or two and avoid a disastrous loss, they could find themselves in playoff contention at the end of the year. I'm not necessarily talking about this year. I'm just talking about Georgia Tech as a program in general, how they fit in within the landscape of the ACC and the larger college football world at large. Again, I don't mean that as an insult, and I hope you're not taking it that way if you're a Georgia Tech fan. I don't think Georgia Tech is an Ohio State or a Texas or a Michigan or a Georgia or a whatever fill in the blank that you could reasonably foresee over the next 5 to 10 years being a consistent playoff making team and championship contending team. But they are a team and a program that in the years where things go well, they could be in the mix for a playoff spot at the end of the year. There's no reason that shouldn't be the case. They're in a very fertile recruiting ground in the state of Georgia. They're in Atlanta, the biggest metro area in the state of Georgia. There's no reason they can't exceed or succeed at that level a couple of times a decade, maybe. So now, a lot of what goes into that, not just for Georgia Tech, but for every team, and this gets us to the point of the video today, is the schedule on a year-to-year basis. As these conferences are getting bigger, as conferences are going away and you're having less conferences, the schedules year to year within the conferences are drastically different. And then every year, the schedules are different from team to team. And you probably, I think you know what I mean, but what I'm saying is not every team in the ACC is going to have an equal schedule every single year. Same with the SEC, Big 10, Big 12, whatever on down the line. So a lot of, especially when you talk about predictions, and this is not a prediction video. I do my prediction videos Usually around the end of May, beginning of June is when I start those. But part of what goes into sort of trying to decide what you think a team's ceiling or floor might be, or how far they might be able to go, or will they have a shot at the postseason? Will they be playing for a postseason spot in November? Things like that, is the schedule that team has. And there's obvious examples every single year in every single conference of what I'm talking about, right? I'll use the SEC as an example from last season. Everybody talked all year and really all offseason leading up to last year about Florida's schedule. Oh my God, Florida's schedule's so hard. You have to play 8 top 15 or top 20 teams or whatever it is, and their last 6 games of the season are just brutal and blah, blah, blah. Then you look at Texas or Missouri, and the way the schedules fell for those two schools, they avoided a lot of the sort of upper echelon schools in the SEC. Now, over the long run, those kinds of things will equal out, I think. I like to gamble, right? So you go to the casino, you play roulette, right? 13 could come 10 times in a row. It's possible. But the longer you play roulette, right, the more likely it becomes that everything evens out. If 13 hits 10 times in a row, then over the next million spins, the numbers will level out. And that's sort of how I look at scheduling in college football right now. There are going to be some teams in a given year that sort of appear to have an easier path to a conference championship game than maybe another team. And so when you get ready to make predictions, it's not always just about, okay, who's the best team in this league, or who are the best 3 teams in this league, right? Because it's completely possible that the 4th or 5th best team in a league could end up with a better record than the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd best team in a league based on how the schedule works. So that's why I do these schedule previews. It gives me an opportunity early on in the offseason, where we're in the middle of March, basically. Happy St. Patrick's Day, too. I guess that's tomorrow, but anyway, it doesn't matter. It starts to kind of lay the foundation and kind of the groundwork of what your prediction might be when it gets ready to do that. And like I said, for me, that's May or June. So you have to have an understanding of which teams sort of have the more difficult roads within a conference to get to the conference championship game, which teams maybe have a little bit of an easier road, where are the tough road games, who's got a tougher non-con schedule. Now, that doesn't matter about making a conference championship game, but it could matter in the end when it comes to getting an at-large bid, right? With a 12-team playoff we saw last year, big difference between 10-2 and 9-3. So when you look at a team's non-con schedule, if they've got a loss or 2 in the non-con, that makes their margin of error a lot smaller when they get to the conference schedule in terms of potentially making an at-large bid down the road, right? Yeah, take a look at Georgia Tech's schedule, for example, and we'll go ahead and put it up and start to go through this. But they've got 2 Power 4 non-con opponents. A lot of teams in the country have 0 Power 4 non-con opponents. Now, I applaud Georgia Tech for this schedule. I like seeing these non-con games just like everybody else does. And I do think we are headed to a place in college football where the schedules are going to be regulated by some independent person or body, whoever that happens to be, uniform scheduling. Now, that doesn't mean all schedules will be equal, but what I mean is I think eventually you're going to get to a spot where everybody plays 9 conference games and everybody plays 1 additional power opponent or 2 additional power opponents or whatever they agree on. I think we're headed that way. Not there yet. So again, when you talk about comparing different schedules and things like that, you look at a team like Georgia Tech, who has 2 power non-con opponents, as opposed to, again, a lot of other schools that maybe have 1 or 0 power non-con opponents. And when we go through the schedule, we'll take a look at the conference games too. And let's just go ahead and start that now. I've done a Colorado version of this video already where I talked about Colorado's schedule. So I talked a good bit about the Colorado-Georgia Tech game on that video. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on that, as a Georgia Tech fan, you can go back and click that Colorado video from a few days ago and hear my thoughts on that game. But obviously a huge game, I think, for both teams here. Georgia Tech's got to travel out west to play on the road at Colorado. A lot of new pieces at Colorado, as is going to be the case every single year under a Deion Sanders coached team, because they rely so heavily on the portal. So there's going to be a lot of turnover every single year at Colorado. That's the obvious. And then you throw on top of that the fact that they lost 2 of the best players in all of college football from last year, Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. They also lost Shiloh Sanders, one of their safeties, or one of their defensive backs. So a lot of turnover there. And you get them at a good spot, I think, because they're going to they're definitely going to be playing a new quarterback. It may very well be a true freshman quarterback from your own backyard. Georgia Tech, man, don't worry, it's from my own backyard too. And if you're a football fan, if you're a Georgia Tech fan and you've been following football, you probably, you know who I'm talking about. But Julian Lewis, this is a kid. If you live in the state of Georgia and you're a college football fan, you've been hearing about Juju Lewis since he was in 8th grade. I wanted him, as a Georgia fan, I wanted him. He ends up at Colorado. Now, they did bring in a transfer quarterback out there, too, Caden Salter, I think was his name, who had a really good year last year in a group of 5. So it's kind of the never-ending question in college football. Do you go with the experienced guy with a lower ceiling, or do you go with the inexperienced guy who could potentially be a superstar, right? We'll see which way Deion goes. I have a feeling it's going to be Juju Lewis. Even if he doesn't start, I think he'll play a lot. But anyway, that's a very interesting game for Georgia Tech on the road at Colorado to start the season. Come back home, you get a little bit of a break here against Gardner-Webb. But that's it. Clemson. This is a difficult start to the season for Georgia Tech. Not that Colorado's a great team. I mean, they were 9-3 last year, though. They exceeded expectations. But again, a lot of new pieces there. And, generally the younger a team is, you want to get them early in the season before sort of the young players have a chance to gain a lot of experience. So Colorado's a team that could get better as the season goes along. A lot will depend on quarterback play, obviously. But you should, you'll be a huge favorite against Gardner-Webb, and then you'll be an underdog, probably a touchdown or so underdog, maybe 10 points, depending on how that Colorado game goes, to Clemson at home. So a road game to start out, and then a home game, non-con, Gardner-Webb, and then you jump right into your conference schedule with Clemson on September 13th, then another non-con game against Temple. So the schedule a little disjointed there at the beginning of the season, a road game against a power opponent, a home game against a group of 5 team, a home game against Clemson, probably going to be the favorite to win the ACC this coming year, and then another non-con game at home against Temple, another group of 5 team. So kind of a back and forth sort of start to the season there for Georgia Tech. On the road at Wake Forest before your first bye week on October 4th, and then everybody gets 2 bye weeks again this season. So decent spot on the schedule, I think. The bye weeks are spread apart nicely, I think. I mean, you play 4, have a bye week. Play 4, have a bye week. Play your last, 3? Or I guess you play 5 and then have a bye week 4 and then a bye week 3. And so there's the bye weeks are spread out in a good way, I think. They don't necessarily come ahead of teams that maybe you would be looking for an additional week, right? Like if you forget about where on the schedule the bye weeks fall, like maybe you'd prefer to have a bye week against Clemson as opposed to Virginia Tech at home, or maybe you'd prefer to have a bye week against Syracuse or Georgia as opposed to on the road at Boston College. But they are spread out, and of course that's pretty good, gives players a chance to rest up, everything like that. So come out of that bye week at home against Virginia Tech. A disappointing team to me last year. A lot of hype around them heading into the offseason. They never really lived up to it. They started the season off with a loss to Vandy and just kind of never gained any traction after that. Get them at home. That's a game I think Georgia Tech needs to win. On the road at Duke, we'll see. Year 2 there under a new coaching staff. Quarterback transferred out. Weird situation at quarterback there. But anyway, on the road at Duke, I think Georgia Tech's a better team than Duke. Home against Syracuse, this could be a big game. Syracuse had a really good year last year that they got to replace their quarterback, but they were a very young team last year with a first-year coaching staff. They're all back. They got a lot of young players that got a lot of experience last year that'll be back this year. They do have to fill that hole at quarterback. Kyle McCord there had a really good year last year at quarterback, so we'll see which direction they go there, but that could be a really good game there, Georgia Tech hosting Syracuse. On the road at NC State, I don't know whether NC State's winning 8 games or 4, but it's somewhere in there. I'm tired of just every other year it being forced down my throat that this is the year NC State's going to win 10 games and make the ACC championship game and the playoffs and all this kind of thing. I'm sick of hearing the more hype NC State gets every year, the worse they are. Maybe NC State goes 100-0. I don't know. You have to play them there. It's not a very difficult place to play. This is a road game. Georgia Tech should find a way to win. Another bye week before you go on the road at Boston College, and then you finish up the season at home against Pitt, and then not really at home, but at home against Georgia on Friday, of course. How do y'all feel about that, by the way, as Georgia Tech fans? I don't mind it. I told you, Georgia's my favorite team. I don't hide that. I don't deny it. But I'm a college football fan. I want to watch as many college football games as I can, right? I don't mind that this game has been moved to Friday. Now, I wouldn't want Georgia, I don't think, playing a Friday game in the middle of the season or something. Like, the Big 12 had this announcement a couple of days ago where they're going to have 10 Friday night games this season. The ACC has done this. The Big Ten has done this too. I wouldn't, as a Georgia fan, I wouldn't want to see them play on a Thursday or Friday night like in the middle of the season. But this rivalry weekend here, where you have 3 or 4 straight days of games, Thanksgiving on Thursday and then Friday, Saturday, whatever it is, I don't mind this. There are so many great games on rivalry weekend. And look, to be honest, again, I'm a Georgia fan. A lot of you watching this are Georgia Tech fans. To us, this is a huge game, Georgia Tech, right? We love this game every single year. Been played forever, in-state rivalry, the whole deal. When you start stacking this game up against the other rivalries that are happening on rivalry weekend, it's pretty far down the list, right? I mean, you've got Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Auburn, Clemson, South Carolina, Florida State, Notre Dame, Southern Cal in a lot of years. Again, I'm not diminishing the importance of this game, especially for recruiting and bragging rights and in-state stuff and all that kind of thing. But in terms of like TV viewership on a national scale, the Georgia Tech game kind of got pushed down the list. So I don't mind it getting moved to Friday. It gets a lot more eyeballs on the game. Last year was one of the best games in this series history. Whatever, I don't even remember anymore. Was it 6 or 7 overtimes, whatever it was? And just a great, just back and forth game. Either team could have won that thing at the end. Georgia Tech completely dominated the first half, especially. Georgia with the comeback in the second half, forces overtime. The rest is history after that, but I don't want to relive that. You've suffered enough trauma. I'm not going to make you go down memory lane there. But anyway, I think ABC hit a home run with moving this game, moving this game to Friday night. Get way more eyeballs on the game than you would if it was on Saturday. So I don't have a problem with it. There's just some sort of purists and traditionalists, which I consider myself kind of a purist and a traditionalist in a sense, that say, no, college football should be played on Saturday. This game should be played on Saturday. I understand that too. It's just, again, now there are some college football fans, actually, scratch that. There are some people who only watch their team. To me, those aren't college football fans. Those are fans of a team. There's Georgia fans. I talk to them every day. All they want to, they watch Georgia and that's it. They don't watch anybody else. And there's probably Georgia Tech fans, same thing. They watch every Georgia Tech game. They don't watch anything else. There's nothing wrong with that. But to me, that's not a college football fan. That's a Georgia fan or a Georgia Tech fan or whatever team it is you're watching. So as a college football fan, I don't mind this game getting moved to Friday because it allows, that's one more game I can watch on Saturday. Whereas, otherwise I'd have to make a sort of a choice on which game I want to watch or whatever. So I don't mind. But anyway, this is the Georgia Tech schedule. What stands out to me? Well, the non-con schedule with Colorado being on the road and Georgia, not technically a road game for Georgia Tech. But if you don't know what has happened here, you see on the thing, you see there it says the game's at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That's the Atlanta Falcons Stadium in Atlanta. Georgia Tech sold their rights to that game to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So it's not a home game. The tickets are going to be split 50-50. And again, this isn't a trash talk video, but look at the last 15 games that have been played in Bobby Dodd Stadium and tell me who's got more fans there, Georgia or Georgia Tech. And that's at Bobby Dodd. There will be more Georgia fans at this game than Georgia Tech. This is technically Georgia Tech's year for a home game. Last year's game was played in Athens. But for a paycheck, Georgia Tech has sold their rights to this home game to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So non-con schedule, you have a road game and a neutral site game that bookends your season. Both of those games will be difficult, in my opinion. And then you should win, Gardner-Webb and Temple should be relatively easy wins. As far as the conference schedule goes, when you look at the way most people are talking about the ACC right now, they're talking Clemson, Miami, and then there's some disagreement after that. Florida State's kind of a wild card. I don't think they're going to be very good, but I guess the potential is there. So when you look at sort of the top teams in the ACC and how people stack them up, you really only play one of them, and that's Clemson. Now you play them real early in the season. Your first conference game there, September 13th at home, be a huge game. If Georgia Tech somehow finds a way to win that, people are going to have to recalculate their expectations for the ACC for this season, but we'll see. You don't have any back-to-back road games, so that's a positive. You do, but they're separated by a bye week at NC State, which isn't very difficult. Bye week at Boston College, not very difficult. So technically, those are 2 road games in a row, I guess, but they're not back to back because they're separated by a bye week. Tough road games. Georgia will be like a road game for you in terms of the crowd. At Boston College, not a very intimidating place to play. It is in November. We'll see. At NC State, again, not the most difficult place to play. At Duke, what does that stadium hold? 11,000 people. Very manageable road schedule. At Wake Forest, your most difficult road game is probably that first one at Colorado. I think this is a very manageable schedule for Georgia Tech. And again, by manageable, no one really has national title expectations for Georgia Tech. I know it's the offseason, and when you're a fan, hope springs eternal, and the optimism is through the roof. The glass is always half full in the offseason. But realistically, could Georgia Tech find themselves in a spot when the calendar turns to November where they are competing for a spot in the 12-team playoff, either through winning the ACC or an at-large type situation? The first month of the season is going to be really important. If you lose the game on the road at Colorado, the path becomes almost impossible, I think, to either an ACC championship game or a playoff berth. Now, that's a non-con game, so it doesn't technically affect your ability to make the ACC championship game. But I guess the point I'm making is, if you can't win on the road at Colorado, you're probably not winning at home against Clemson. You're definitely not beating Georgia. And you'll probably drop, another 2 or 3 games along the way if you're sort of not ready to beat a rebuilt Colorado team in week 1. If you win the Colorado game, then that sort of opens up everything else. The Clemson game, I don't want to call it a throwaway game. Obviously, Georgia Tech could win that game, but let's just assume you lose it. That would be one ACC loss. You probably could afford 1 more, maybe 2 more. I don't know. I think it's a manageable schedule. Anyway, let me know down below what you think. I appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.